Job has what's called a frame narrative, with a lot of poetry in the middle. What this means is that the story opens and closes in pretty accessible, regular language, or prose, and then there's a lot of more complicated language, or poetry, that makes up the bulk of this book. Unfortunately, I'm going to break the whole thing down for you into manageable pieces. That's coming up next. One of the easiest ways to think about the structure of Job is that reading this book is like watching someone fall into a pit and then try to claw his way back out. When the story opens, in the portion of the book known as the Prologue on Earth and in Heaven, Job isn't yet in the pit. He's a righteous man with a good life, including health and wealth. But the Satan has plans for Job, and by the end of chapter 2, Job is in the pit. His life is in ruins, and his body is ravaged with disease. Now the poetry begins. In the first section of poetry, chapters 3 through 27, which includes Job's opening monologue and 3 rounds of debate between Job and his 3 friends, Job is deep in his pit of suffering. His friends Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar aren't much help. In alternating chapters, they blame Job for his misfortune and urge him to repent. Their perspective is completely black and white. They hold fast to their belief that the good prosper, while the evil suffer. One of their frequent answers to Job's question, "Why me?" is that he must deserve the evil raining down upon him. There's not much Job is able to do at this point to get himself out of the pit. Now, Job does maintain his innocence in each of his responses to his friends, but his belief that there must be a reason for his suffering, that, in fact, God brought this suffering upon him, keeps him going around and around instead of moving him up and out of his suffering. It's not until the second section of poetry, in chapters 28 through 37, that the poetry starts to move out of the pit and towards the light. Yes, Job does rehearse his problems, his complaints, and his request for a day in court with God during the chapters 29 through 31. But when Elihu begins to speak in chapter 32, something shifts. Elihu is the first character in the story who doesn't engage with Job's "why me?" Instead, Elihu changes the subject of discussion from "why me?" to "who is God?" His section of the book of Job focuses on the nature of God, his power and mercy. And that leads us to our final section of poetry, when in 2 gorgeous speeches, God himself answers the question of who he is. In this portion of the book of Job, chapters 38 through 41, God's assertions of his mighty power and supreme wisdom help Job emerge from his pit. They take the focus off Job's suffering, which can't be explained, and put the focus on the glory of God. By chapter 42, a repentant Job stands on solid ground again, and affirms that everything he knows about God has changed. Instead of conventional wisdom, he has gained true wisdom. "My ears had heard of you," he tells God, "but now my eyes have seen you." The poetry ends there, and the epilogue, written in prose, tells how God restores Job's fortunes and gives him twice as much as he had before.